Today's video, we're taking another look at an AMD K5 system.
We got 20-minute videos on old technology, computers, laser discs, and some CDs. We got two little dogs licking their balls on the screen, and now it's time for the show.
Hey guys, and welcome to another video, and today we're going to take a look, another look at the AMD K5 CPU in this new, faster setup. I had a lot of fun with my previous build, my old-timey K5 machine, where I had a K5 75 MHz CPU in there, and I really kind of like that CPU. It's a little bit different, it's a little neat. I hadn't really messed around with the K5 CPUs in the past, and they're not really... I don't want to say they're not rare or anything, but people don't talk about them a lot. They're almost like a forgotten generation of CPU, but I had a lot of fun with that CPU and that machine, and I wanted to take things a little further. And the board I had with that machine, it was a little bit unstable under certain circumstances, and the case really wasn't optimal, and I really ended up in a situation where I wanted to use that PC case for something else. So I decided to make a whole new build based around the AMD K5 in a different case and a different setup and a different K5. We went from the slowest K5, the 175 megahertz, PR rating K5, all the way up to the fastest, generally, we'll talk about that in a minute, which is the 166 megahertz K5. It's really just a 166 PR rating, which means it's the equivalent of 166 megahertz Pentium CPU. So, yeah, it's a little weird, a little confusing, but whatever. So, I kind of wanted to keep this sort of a simple build. I acquired this case from a friend. I like its really cool case. It has a nice 3-digit display here, although the plastic here is cracked, which is kind of annoying. It looks like it's like a film that you can like maybe peel off. It was peeling, but no, it's an actual crack right here. But you can still see it fine. I found these cases that have a 3-digit display a little hard to find. At least I don't have many of them, so I was just happy to get one with a 3-digit display, so I could actually display the full speed or PR rating of this K5. The thing with the that front LED display, it actually didn't work when I picked this up. I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working, but what I was able to do, I was able to figure out which pin was ground and 5 volt, and I just got one of these little Molex. I don't know if that's for a fan, but it had the 5 volt and then the ground, and then it goes to a normal Molex. So I stuck that in there and I hot glued it in place, and it's just kind of going to a normal Molex connector, and then it connects to the power supply, and yeah, now it's working. Of course, I took the AMD badge off that old case and stuck it on this one. Power, turbo isn't hooked up, doesn't work anyways. Reset, and then key lock. But yeah, it's a pretty cool case. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over this thing. We'll take a look at the motherboard and the CPU and the cards I decided to go with really quick. And then we're just kind of going to jump into benchmarks and some gameplay. So this might be a little bit of a shorter video. Alright, so here is the motherboard I'm going with for this project. It is a PT2006 motherboard. And I'm mostly going for this motherboard because of the form factor. It just fits well into the case I want to use for this project. I did consider using my Amtron motherboard, the same one I have in like my old-timey K5 build that had the AMD K5 75 MHz, and before that it was my like old-timey Pentium build with a 75 MHz Pentium. I went with that originally, but it didn't fit well inside the case I want to use at all. So I'm going to go with this motherboard. I think this motherboard's a little bit older. It's a little tiny bit less capable, but it should be very comparable and fine. It's just a AT motherboard, AT keyboard. It actually has a header for USB. It supports USB. I suspect PS2 mouse as well, though probably not going to use a PS2 mouse. Built-in I/O. I don't know how much RAM we have on here right now. It uses a Coast module, so that's cache on a stick for the L2 cache. This is a 512 kilobyte stick. Originally, it almost looks like this might be the L2 cache, but it is this. I'm really not sure what this is right here. These chips actually, if you look at a certain angle, they actually do have writing on them. But these almost remind me of the fake cache chips in the PC chips motherboards, but the traces actually do seem to go somewhere. I could probably just look up the numbers and stuff on these chips and see what they are, but I don't need to bother. Socket 7, 4 PCI, 3 ISA, that's just fine. WinBond controller via here. We have a Intel chipset, a VX chipset. I'm not sure if this is the Triton 1 or 2 chipset, but Intel chipset should be nice and stable. So yeah, this is the board I'm going to be going with. So let's take a look at the CPU. And here's our CPU, AMD K5. I went with the PR166. That's a Pentium rating of 166. In practice, as far as just regular like integer math operations, this chip is actually faster than the Intel Pentium equivalent. All the AMD K5 chips generally are faster in regular integer calculations. Now, floating point math, it's not as good as the Pentium, so this isn't like a really great chip for things like Quake or things that are Pentium optimized, but they tend to do really good in certain games like, well, I think Doom was one of the games that did really good in, so we'll see. I'm in a lot of like computer forums. I've seen a lot of people that have found old computers with these AMD chips, and they're like, it didn't do real good in games, and so I threw in an MMX Pentium, and now it's great in games. So I don't know. I don't have a ton of experience with these K5 chips. I did like the K575 that I used in my other build a while ago. I like that chip a lot. So I think I'm gonna like this CPU, but I don't know. From what I've heard, it was really meant more for like business applications. This wasn't really known as a gaming CPU, but I think it has a good niche in a lot of DOS games. A lot of those 2.5 sort of DOS games I've heard that it performs really well in. I don't know, we'll play around with it a little bit. This is about as fast as you can reasonably go if you want a K5 CPU. There was a AMD K5 200 megahertz, but it's extremely rare. We're probably talking in the rarity level of like Cyrix 586 133 megahertz chips. It's pretty hard to find, although you can, with some of these PR166, you can overclock these to 200 megahertz. I'm probably not going to try it with this one, but it is doable for what I hear with the proper cooling, and if you have, the proper cherry pick your CPU and motherboard and all that good stuff, the usual stuff with overclocking. So, yeah, I'm really interested to see how this chip performs. So, we'll just pair it up with the motherboard and see how it does. Here's our hard drive. It is, I believe it's a 7 or 8 gigabyte hard drive, so not the biggest, but big enough for this machine. And I also want to put out, I did end up throwing in a USB card in there just for convenience. So we've got a USB 2.0 card in there giving us 4 external USB ports, and there's actually an internal USB port too. So just thought that really, I think adding the USB really adds to the convenience of this machine. So I think the video card I'm going to put in it for now is just a S3 Verge DX, a little bit faster than the original Verge. It's pretty slow as far as 3D acceleration goes. I'm not going to talk too much about this card. Of course, we all know that it was known as a graphics decelerator for its slowness. But the 2D wise, really good for 2D, very DOS compatible, and for everything else, it does what I need it to do. This machine isn't going to be a gaming powerhouse, so whatever. It's an S3. So I'm going to talk about the sound card I went with real quick. I went with an older Sound Blaster 16 with a Wave Blaster attached. The original card I wanted to use, I couldn't. It was just too long. It was a full-length ISA card, and it just wouldn't fit. It would either hit the heatsink and fan for the CPU, or it would hit the lever for the CPU heatsink, so it just wouldn't fit in this case. And there's our K5 PR166, booting right up. Worked first try, that's always a good sign. Before we get into these benchmarks, I just want to stress real quickly, the Verge card we're using, it does, a lot of these games coming up do maybe have patches for the proprietary API for that S3 Verge card, the S3D. I'm not using that for any of these games. These tests are really more about the CPU than the Verge card. I do have something planned that has to do with the Verge cards later, and we'll be looking at some games with that API hopefully down the road. But for these games coming up and these tests, we're just using, we're not going to use that S3 API. A lot of these games coming up are just 2D games anyways. That's really what this machine is kind of built for at the moment, just kind of 2D titles, at least for right now. I do have some plans down the road for this rig. And there's our score for Speed Sys, and now let's move on to the usual benchmarks. Here we got 153.6, PC player at 480 or 640 by 480. I think we scored 15.2 for that one. Doom did very well, as I expected. We got averaged about 72 FPS for Doom, which is pretty good. And here we have Quake at 320 by 200, and it did pretty well. It's a low resolution, but it actually did pretty well. I think it got almost 27 FPS, so we're getting close. We're on the heels of 30 FPS with this game at low resolution. Kicking up the resolution, though, it didn't do so well, but yeah, it's still definitely playable at lower resolutions with this setup. And just a quick example, here's Quake running at 360 by 480 with the same time demo. Not a huge leap up in resolution, but it's enough that you can definitely tell it's running slower than it was at that lower resolution. And then, obviously, we have to have the Duke Nukem 3D test here with this setup, and it runs perfectly fine. I didn't have it on the highest settings or anything like that. I had detail on high, but I wasn't using like SVGA mode or anything, but it handled the game just fine. I didn't really have any problems at all. I think the setup really excels at this kind of thing. I did watch High Treason's video on his improved K5 machine a little bit before I started messing around with this machine, and I have to agree with him that this CPU really excels with sort of early FPS games and like 2D titles. It just really excels at those kind of games, and ran Duke 3D perfectly. Here we are taking a look at Tomb Raider. Now this is the demo version. I'm running it on high details, and it runs just fine. Now this is a game that there is a patch that uses the S3D proprietary API for the Verge cards. About 7 or 8 years ago, I did make a kind of a clumsy article on my blog, and I actually compared all of the versions of Tomb Raider that used the proprietary APIs. It's a lot of effort to do at the time, but it was kind of a clumsy early effort. But yeah, that article's still on my blog. But anyways, yeah, this game runs fine. It's running here in software mode and plays just fine. And here is the game Whiplash, and this is a racing game from I think 95 or 96. I believe this game also supports a couple proprietary APIs, but we're just running in software mode here. And yeah, it's a pretty neat little racing game. And this is also my first time playing this game for testing or anything otherwise, but I will be revisiting this game in the future.
Keep going!
And here's another FPS game. This is Outlaws. Interesting art style, although that woman there, I always feel like her eyes are going to slide off her face for some reason. So I did initially try playing the game at a resolution of 640 by 480, but it really wasn't a good experience. Just felt a little unresponsive. Yeah, and it just wasn't the best experience at that resolution. After lowering the resolution though to 320 by 240, the game became a much better experience. And here we have Diablo, and man, I forgot how, this is the demo version of Diablo, by the way, but man, I forgot how dark this game was for the time. You know, looking back now, it just seems like any other game, but yeah, for the time, it's very gory and dark. I forgot about that. I also forgot how slow the walking speed was. I don't know, maybe there was a way to run, and I just don't remember. But yeah, this game more or less played okay. It did bog down a little bit when there were like a ton of enemies on screen, but it's perfectly playable.
Death surrounds me.
And lastly, this is the non-interactive demo for Baldurs Gate. Unfortunately, I own the game, but I don't have it easily accessible to me right now. So I was looking for a demo maybe I could play, but there's just this, the only thing I could find with this non-interactive demo. But I figured I'd throw it up there anyways. I'm pretty sure this machine could play this game. I remember on my computer at the time, I was able to play it fine from what I remember, and I think I either had a Pentium 133 or a Pentium 166. I can't remember. I think it was a 133, and I know the graphics card was like a built-in Trident graphics card because it gave the game some kind of issue, and I had to disable some setting to make it display correctly. But if that machine could play it, I'm sure this setup here could play Baldur's Gate as well.
Is it a good idea to be wearing plate mail in the middle of a thunderstorm?
Why? A little rain never hurt anyone.
So again, yeah, I had a lot of fun with this machine. We didn't really stress it too much in the video today, but it wasn't really necessarily about stressing it too much. Yeah, I think the K5 PR166 performs about what I expected. Games like Quake obviously didn't play as well as if they had a Pentium in them, but I think this thing does excel to an extent with certain games that aren't heavily optimized for the Pentium. A lot of 2D games, of course, it depends on what you put in the system, video card, etc., etc. But yeah, I think you can have a lot of fun with this CPU. It's a little bit different than your Pentium that you'll usually find in these setups. It's been rock solid on me so far as stability goes. CPU-Z will crash when I try to run it, but I'm not quite sure what that is. Maybe I'm just running a weird version of it. I seem to recall it happening before with a K5 CPU, so I don't know what it is with my copy of CPU-Z for Windows 98 and AMD K5 CPUs, but they just seem to crash when I try to run that program, but it's not really a big deal. But yeah, it's done pretty good as long as you don't crank the resolution up too much, but you can say that basically about the Pentiums as well. Once you start getting into higher resolutions, it does start to chug. But yeah, if you keep your expectations moderate, I think you can have a lot of fun with this CPU. And I'm not done with this particular machine yet. There were a couple things I wanted to do with this machine. There was a specific sound card I had in mind that I wanted to install in this machine and test out. That unfortunately didn't work out just because of the motherboard. Now, the motherboard works really well with this case, but it doesn't work well with long ISA sound cards. Where the ISA slots are and where the CPU socket is, long ISA cards will hit the CPU and the heatsink, and you just can't use long ISA cards in this machine, unfortunately. So I had to change my plans a little bit, and I didn't go with the sound card I wanted to, but I do have some plans for testing some video cards out in this machine, so we're going to see this machine again, and it's going to have a different video card. That Verge I put in there, like I said, that's just kind of a placeholder video card, so you will be seeing this again in a different video. So yeah, that's about all I have to say with it. K5, pretty interesting CPU. We've played around with it before. Great integer performance. Floating point, math performance isn't horrible, just not as good as the Pentium. But, that's the Pentium's real strength. But, yeah, if you come across one of these, give it a chance. And especially these, the higher end ones, like the 166 PR rating K5, they tend to be a little pricey, too. I lucked out. If you're really diligent, you can find them under $25, but they do tend to go for, $35, $40, $50 for the PR166 K5s. And even the ones that are slightly slower go for a bit of a premium. So keep that in mind. They are kind of sought after CPUs. I'd love to get my hands on the 200 megahertz chip, but that's probably not going to happen. But it would be cool for the collection to come across the 200 megahertz K5, but whatever. So yeah, stay tuned if you like this setup, you like this CPU. We will be seeing this guy again in a future video, and I hope to see you guys in a future video, and see you next time. Thanks for watching.